Well, hello, everybody. Good morning. Good to be in the space with you again. Welcome to those joining virtually. Bill, I think maybe just a slight backing down on my volume, a little echo. Thank you. What a lively group here today. Thank you. So I have a very depressing message, so we should really get ready to change gears now. The title of the talk for today is "The World Sucks." And we're all doomed. But there is some form of hope. We are actually, as always on a Sunday morning, looking for that shift in consciousness that brings us into the realization in the here and the now that we are eternally safe, we are in a state of grace forever, that the awakened state is actually a choice that doesn't require time, it requires willingness. And if our willingness is strong and one-pointed and focused on what is real, we can peel back the veils within consciousness and enter into that blessed state or that union or that yoga with our own divine nature. And so that's what makes this world the catalyst that it is. So, I was joking, but we can riff on the idea that the world sucks. It sucks for a reason. It's depressing for a reason. It gives false hope and false promises for a reason. And when we're maturing as spiritual beings, we begin to become aware of the glitz and the glamour and the false allures of the world. When we're little children, we run after the shiny stuff, and if it feels good, it must be good. And so we learn the lessons that even when things are pleasurable, it ends up being a hot stove nevertheless at the end of the day. So as we mature in our spirituality, we begin to see that the world is this way for a reason. It's a classroom. And like I had said, it's a catalyst to trigger the turning about within the deepest seat of our heart, as it says in Tibetan Buddhism. That turning about in the deepest seat of our heart is what Christians would call repentance. Repentance, as we've talked about a lot in this service over the years, it's literally you're looking one way, and to repent, which in the original languages of Hebrew or Greek in the Bible, you have teshuva or metanoia. And both basically mean to turn your face around. You're looking out, it's time to look in. And as we mature, we have this natural inclination to see that the world offers nothing. And so we turn our face within, we seek inwardly, and we find everything. It's that great paradox that we keep bringing up week after week. So even when, and we've oftentimes experienced this in our own life, that what brings us to the path, what brings us to a service like this, is that we often have that breakdown, that crisis, that experience that shocks us, where we realize the world actually doesn't have anything that I want. This is something that we learn in stages. It's a process. And sometimes it will be lifetimes till we can really wean ourselves off of this false hope entirely. But if you have the good graces of getting that shock, that trauma, that sense of loss and betrayal perhaps, that can be accelerated immensely. That we can begin to realize that even in this excruciating pain and this inner torment, that there is something beautiful about it, that in the wounding is the gold, right? And so we can do this whether it's physical illness or psychological issues, relationship issues, financial issues. All of it is considered the world, right? And so we're going to be looking through the lens of Christianity and Christian mysticism this morning at how the world was viewed and understood within the New Testament and the traditions that followed. I think you're going to find, as I often say, that when we look at these old-time religions from a different point of view, they are phenomenal maps of consciousness. We've been conditioned here in the West, in America, to be given religion in a very static and uninspired way a lot of the times, right? Very fundamentalist, perhaps, or closed-minded, or bigoted, or small. And when we open up these teachings in the way that they were truly given, or at least the way I think they were truly given, something wonderful can happen. As we'll see when we look at the interpretations of Karl Barth this morning. Not that I agree with everything that Karl Barth has to say, but what made him create sort of an earthquake within Christianity when he wrote the book that we'll look at today was that he infused these familiar terms with new meaning. And as a result, it was designed to trigger an experience rather than a blind belief in a creed or a dogma. So if you're familiar with A Course in Miracles, he at one point says in the Manual for Teachers that a universal theology is impossible, but a universal experience is necessary. And so when our minds have been keyed up to want to experience divinity in God, then we will actually see within all theologies the experience. We will be able to sniff it out. We will be able to see, he might be saying it differently than I would say it, but he's got his finger on the pulse. He's beyond the veil of illusion here. And so we'll see some of that this morning, yeah? All right. So get ready to be depressed. No, just kidding. Just kidding. So what really the main thrust of our talk that I had planned before I started joking about it was that we're going to look at this path of mysticism. Right? Mysticism is exactly what we were just saying. It is a pathway into direct experience of God or what is truly real, the absolute. And so mysticism traditionally has been laid out as a three-step process, right? The path of purification is the necessary first approach. The path of illumination and the path of union. They all work together synergistically. It's like washing your clothes, right? You have dirty clothes. And in order to have clean clothes, you have to put your clothes in the wash. They have to be purified in order to be worn again, right? So the path of purification is necessary. The Catholics would call it the path of purgation. You're purging, right? You're getting rid of what makes you spiritually sick. And so you have to wash in order to be lit up. You can't be lit up without washing. And so it's kind of like if you take off dirty clothes and you think you could just throw them in the dryer and you're good to go. You know, we want to skip that part of purification because it doesn't always feel good. And we, as ego-minded people, we often associate purification as loss and sacrifice and drudgery and upset. And, you know, I can't get all of my desires now. I have to give up some things that are blocking my path from awakening. So we oftentimes even look for spirituality, forms of spirituality. You're just good the way you are. You don't have to do anything. Just believe and ask God for the car and ask God for the new house and ask God for the, full wallet and everything will come to you because you're just a good person. And this is a very popular prosperity kind of an approach that, This isn't one of those churches, as you could tell, because they have 10,000 people in the audience, oftentimes. So the path of purification requires something from us, right? And this is why Jesus said in the Gospels, the path that leads to death is a very wide road, and lots of people are on that road. But the path that leads to life is a very narrow way, and few find it. And the only reason why few find it is that few are willing to do what it takes to enter the blessed state, right? And again, this reminds me of something Daniel Goleman wrote a book many years ago, Emotional Intelligence. Are we familiar with this book? They did a case study on little kids in a classroom. I think they were second graders. And the experiment was, the teacher said, I have one cookie now that you can eat on the spot. Or in 20 minutes, if you keep that cookie, I will give you another cookie, and you'll have 2 cookies if you can wait 20 minutes. So what they did was the teacher left the room. Some kids ate the cookie immediately. Other kids waited and got 2 cookies. Then they followed these kids over the years and into their adult life. And they saw that the kids that wanted immediate gratification, in other words, they wanted to eat that cookie right there and then, didn't do so well in life. They had issues, addictions, and struggles, more than the group that were able to control their impulses and stay with the idea that better things await me in the future if I can resist my impulses now. If I can curb my desires now, I actually will enjoy things much more in the future. And so this applies to this idea of the path of purification, where if we can control our impulses of wanting to feel immediate pleasure and get the immediate fix, then we can actually attain a state that is pure bliss, uninterrupted bliss. Like, this is actually the payoff. So that if we curb the lower nature with its impulses and desires, the higher nature can emerge in our awareness and give us what we truly want and what truly satisfies. So this is the jihad, right? This is the battle of Kurukshetra that we talk about in the Bhagavad Gita. The lower desires and the lower impulses that drive us towards selfishness and darkness and self-indulgence, versus the higher road of the forces of light that bring us into the blessed state of divine union or yoga. And so we are always at this point of choice between the lower desires and the higher desires, right? So the path of purification is where we are willing to undergo the temporary uncomfortableness, the sense of losing out maybe at a human animal level of fully indulging our pleasures and our passions because we've tasted something more blissful and we're willing to give everything to that. So that last point that I say is vital to the path. You have to have the taste in order to have the motivation, right? So some of us have that. We get the flash, we get the tap, we get the insight that there is something greater than myself that's calling me home, that's calling me onto this path of love and union and joy and freedom. And you're always then, once you have that taste, you're then given the choice of, do you want more of it or do you want to hide from it and go into a different direction? Which way are you going to look? Towards God or towards the world? Right? And as it says in the Bible, book of James, you can't love God and the world, right? You can't serve 2 masters. As Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, you can't ride 2 horses that are going in opposite directions. You actually have to choose. And it's a totalizing choice. This is why we hesitate. This is why we stand at that crossroad of our life oftentimes going, trying to weigh the situation as, being very deliberate. And so the choice is really a totalizing choice. It's a total commitment. You're either going towards the world or you're going towards God, right? Now, and we'll see this in Bhagavad Gita class for those who are there on Wednesdays. The irony or the paradox is when you give up the world for God and you go into God, God gives you the bliss of the world. But you have to die to the lower ego and its passions first. And that's why very few find the narrow way. The narrow way leads to life. And when you find this abundant life, it will overflow and show itself in everything in the world. You will feel the joy of living in this life, but you will feel it from a higher place and with a higher taste, right? So that's the paradox. You lose your life, as Jesus says in the gospel, and you find your life. You die to yourself, and you're reborn as yourself, your true self, right? So it's never a loss, is my point. Never a loss. The ego will feel like it's a loss because it's the ego that's dying. But thank God, you're not the ego. And that's what's going to be really trippy. You're not who you think you are as this lower human animal. That is the soil that we've been talking about in which the divine seed is gestating. And when you turn your face around to want to know where that seed is and what it is, that seed will sprout and flood your awareness with a new perception and a new vision. Yeah? Okay. So let's chill out a little bit and open the mind, become very sensitive. And so whatever we've walked in here with, whatever we got going on in our life, whether good or bad, we just leave it at the feet of the Holy Spirit or the divine guide in whatever form or name you care to give it. We just come to this moment empty, open, and ready to receive. That we may experience a higher vision and a higher voice within our own being. And so it is. So we're going to look first at a passage in the first letter to the Corinthians. It's a letter written by St. Paul in the late 50s of the first century, right? So almost 2,000 years ago. And what's interesting about what we're going to look at this morning is that we'll see what we were just talking about displayed in this little passage when he starts by saying, "Brothers and sisters, consider your calling. Not many are wise from a human perspective, not many powerful, not many of noble birth. Instead, God has chosen what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. And God has chosen what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God has chosen what is insignificant and despised in the world, what is viewed as nothing, to bring to nothing what is viewed as something, so that no one can boast in his presence. So this is a powerful statement of spiritual psychology and the state of the heart. So the idea of the calling, right? The calling is this subtle pull that we feel in our life. The calling actually comes from a word that actually is better translated as summons. Like you're being summoned. And you're being you're getting pulled by a gravitational force. That's more of what we're getting in that nuanced understanding of calling. And what makes this a very important point in this passage is those that know that they're nothing in the eyes of the world, that are humble, that are meek and weak, and on the margins of society, and the people that are not wealthy, the people that don't own a lot of land. Like these are people who are struggling and yet have this sense of openness to the call because they realize the world offers them nothing, right? They're already kind of set up to hear the call if they're willing to become sensitive to it. The opposite is the case for those that think they're something, those of noble birth, those who are living high on the hog, those who feel like they're strong within their own self. And in the Psalms of David, it talks about the wealthy and the oppressor having fat around his or her heart. Right? It's a poetic image to say that the heart is just not sensitive. It's insulated by their own self-importance. And so they can't feel the call. They don't get inspired to change. In fact, they have too much to lose in their mind if they were to answer that call. And so this idea then is what knows itself as nothing is in a position to bring to nothing those that are something. So that's a really important point as well, because we think sometimes that, and I should say, I think at times that by following God, somehow the world will, kind of give me what I want now because I'm doing the good thing. I'm the good boy, and things will come to me. But oftentimes, and over the years, apart from tremendous blessings that have come in my life, I'm not living high on the hog. And it doesn't mean that if you are living high on the hog, that you're not in the call. But it makes it more difficult when you think you're something, right? And this is really the point that I wanted to bring out through this little passage by Karl Barth. It says, the importance, he talks about the apostle, he says, a man may be of value to another man. He's using old language, right? A person may be of value to another person, not because he wishes to be important, not because he possesses some inner wealth of soul, not because of something he is, but because of what he is not. So this is, oftentimes when I get in my own head and I'm thinking in my natural reasoning kind of a thing, I'm like, who would ever show up on a Sunday morning to hear me talk? Like, I really have these thoughts. Like, why would people come? Get up early. I wouldn't do it. Why would people get up early and come and sit here for an hour and hear me talk? I just don't get it. And when I'm still and I hear what Karl Barth is telling me here, that is, it's because I know I'm nothing. I don't know if you know I'm nothing, but I know I'm nothing. And as a result of me sometimes having that right frame of mind to know I'm nothing, something can come through and help you or feed you or inspire you or enlighten you. That's not me. That's what Karl Barth is saying. I have nothing to give you. When I know that about myself and I've humbled myself, something can come through. Right? His importance may consist in his poverty, in his hopes and fears, in his waiting and hurrying, in the direction of his whole being towards what lies beyond his horizon and beyond his power. In other words, I know I'm nothing, but I know where I can find something. I know everything that I think is false and an illusion, but I know there's one who walks with me that is the truth itself. And I humble myself to that presence within. And as a result of that, I can then be, in my own broken way, a channel for that presence. And what he's saying then is, because we first get to that humility, then we can receive the felicity, the joy, and the spiritual power. That's why in A Course in Miracles, he gives it very succinctly when he says, be humble before him and be great in him. Your humility gets you into the door, that narrow way that leads to life. It's interesting with the symbology of the Holy Scriptures, the Bible. You know, in the Old Testament, the Jews are leaving Egypt, and Pharaoh represents this arrogant, malignant, narcissist ego, because he's in control of everything. He's fat, he's rich, he's powerful, and he doesn't care about other life. They're there to serve him. And if he needs to enslave them for it, so be it, as long as his needs are met and he's satisfied, right? They leave that mentality. And in order to enter the promised land, which is the name Canaan, the symbol there is Canaan translates literally as to bow your head low. You can't get into the promised land like this. You get into the promised land like this. You know you're nothing. And as you enter the door, you get everything. Be humble before him and great in him. He wants to give you everything. Abundance beyond your imagination. Pleasure beyond your wildest dreams. But in order to have that, you must be stripped of everything that's false and blocks the way to true life and true joy. So this is why he says, when you know that you're nothing, then you can move towards that horizon that we were just talking about, of that promised land, the high calling, right? So then Barth goes on and he says, the importance of an apostle is negative rather than positive. So for those who care, Barth is playing on this notion that Soren Kierkegaard brought up in his book, The Difference Between Genius and Apostle. And what Kierkegaard laid out there is going to be echoed in what Barth is saying here. A genius is full of himself. A genius thinks that it's basically coming from his own thinking and ability. An apostle knows he's nothing. And whatever comes to him that is amazing and transcendent and beautiful and revolutionary and life-changing is coming from beyond him. Yeah? The importance of an apostle is negative rather than positive. In him, a void becomes visible. And for this reason, he is something to others. He is able to share grace with them, to focus their attention, and to establish them in waiting and in adoration. Because there's nobody there. He's void. And as the void can be a clear mirror to bring the hearts of others into alignment with their own indwelling divinity, where they can then be in a state of union and adoration. The Spirit gives grace through him. Possessing nothing, he has nothing of his own to offer. And so the more he imparts, the more he receives. The more he receives, the more he imparts. In other words, the apostle needs this as much as everybody else. But what helps the experience for the apostle is he knows he can't get what he needs out in the world. He becomes nothing. And by then giving his or her life over to the grace of God, he then becomes a channel for others to receive blessing in whatever way you're specifically designed to give the blessing. It doesn't mean that you're going to sit up here. It means that it can be any way your life is set up to give it. But by knowing you're nothing, and knowing that you are just as much in the swamp of the world like we've been talking, this lotus seed that starts off in the mud, in order to sprout and come up into the light, you need this grace as much as everybody else. So by nullifying yourself for the grace of God and becoming a channel of grace, what you give to others can then be given to you. This is clearly laid out in A Course in Miracles, which we teach here on Monday nights at 7:15. And so this giving and receiving is how the apostle, whoever we are, gets to be released from their own trials and tribulations. Right? That's what he says. As we give, we receive. The more we give, the more we receive. And then here's a little bit more. Actually, we'll switch back to Paul for a moment. So, when Paul comes to his Corinthian audience, now Corinth was in ancient Greece, right? And Corinth has been described as the Las Vegas of the ancient world. Right? It was a very, indulgent place. That aside, Paul comes to these people in this Greek city, and he tells them that when he first came to them, he said, I didn't come with brilliance of speech or wisdom. And he says, I came to you in weakness and fear and much trembling. My speech and my proclamation were not persuasive words of wisdom, but with a powerful demonstration by the Spirit. You see, there's nothing there. He's not some bigwig, some smooth talker. He's a stumbling, stuttering mess that also is a live wire of spiritual force and grace. And so people are seeing through the imperfections of the man and getting the juice that's coming through him, right? So that your faith might not be based on men's wisdom, but on God's power. So he's literally displaying what we're talking about. I'm imperfect. I'm a broken vessel. There's really nothing good in me. I'm not special. And because I know that, God can use that powerfully. And so that is the display. And when you're experiencing it, you're getting the fact that that's what I need to focus on. not on trying to live a perfect life or be polished or super successful or uber rich. It's actually what's really meaningful in life is to have God's wisdom operating in my life and to feel God's power buoying me up out of all of my trials and struggles. That's what matters at the end of the day. Right? You can't take any of this with you. It's all sand. So when you have that wake-up call, the fat around your heart gets pulled away, and you have more of an attention and a sensitivity to the power and the wisdom of God moving through things and people. So then Paul says, before you think too far that, we're not going to give you something truly glorious, it's not just this broken down message. He says, we do speak a wisdom, but we speak this higher wisdom among the mature. Now that Greek word mature is teleos, and teleos is initiated. So the mature are the ones that have gone through the purification process. You've entered into a place where you're now ready for the higher teaching. He's going to, in a moment, say, I couldn't give you this higher wisdom because you were still babies. You were still dominated by the lower ego and your natural mind. And you were looking out into the world as if that was where you had your destination and your hope. You have to purify. You have to turn around in your heart. And as you become more sensitive to this purification process, you mature. And then you're literally initiated into higher teachings. This is done spiritually. I think some of us are experiencing this, yes? That when you do make this true commitment in your heart, you have this unequivocal call for God, you see the world for what it truly offers and you don't want it, you actually start to get the subtle guidance. It can be quite startling at times. People and situations show up on cue. You're given everything you need at the instant that you need it. When you have a thought that isn't in alignment with spirit, sometimes in that next instant, somebody will say something, you'll hear a song on the radio, there'll be a billboard, and wow, like there's something operating in my life that's beyond what I consider possible. And I'm being guided very carefully on this path of initiation. And as a result of that, you keep getting more and more encouraged because you keep tasting the Spirit. And your inner person gets stronger and more mature. And he says, so we speak the wisdom among the mature, the initiated, but not a wisdom of this world or the rulers of this world who are coming to nothing. On the contrary, we speak God's hidden wisdom in a mystery, a wisdom God predestined before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age knew this wisdom, for if they had known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So you're going to have to indulge me for a moment. What we often don't get when we read the New Testament is that the New Testament was written in a certain culture at a certain time. And when Paul is writing, what scholars have called, let me say it this way, the cultural milieu in which Paul is writing. Biblical scholars, historians have termed this Second Temple Judaism. Second Temple Judaism has its own type of literature. It has a very developed angelology and demonology. There was a lot of ideas percolating in Paul's day that were kind of new or becoming more and more clear from the past in terms of God's revelation and teaching, right? So when Paul's talking about the rulers of this age, and that this wisdom that he's giving to the mature doesn't come from academe, it doesn't come from intellectuals of the world, doesn't come from the institutions of the world. It's a different kind of wisdom. It's a mystery, and we're going to get more into that in a moment. What Paul is saying is that in this cultural milieu is that there is a, a power structure within the world, that the rulers at the level of the world, the political rulers, are also channels. They're channels of unseen forces, not of grace, but of darkness. And so there is this concerted effort to keep us going towards the world, lusting after the world, and staying within the clutches of the world. And so Paul's saying the wisdom that I'm giving you has nothing to do with that. Has nothing to do with voting or politics or politicians or institutions or academia. It has nothing to do with that. In fact, it cancels that. It shows you that is nothing. Right? It's a tremendous wake-up call. It shows you the nothingness of everything you thought was somethingness. And that's why sometimes we're a little trepidatious on answering the call. Are you ready to see that? Are you willing to really see that? So that's why Bart will say this. The gospel neither requires men to engage in the conflict of religions or the conflict of philosophies, nor does it compel them to hold themselves aloof from these controversies. Like, you can engage in that stuff if you want, but it's also, it's not required if you're not into it. But here's the thing. In announcing the limitation of the known world by another that is unknown. Now remember, we're injecting new insight into these old ideas. When we talk about the gospel, we're talking about this total shift in consciousness, this awakening, this turning around in the deepest seat of your heart and being illuminated by discovering the Spirit, the grace within. So in announcing the limitation of the known world by another that is unknown, the gospel does not enter into competition with the many attempts to disclose within the known world some more or less unknown and higher form of existence and to make it accessible to human beings. The gospel is not a truth among other truths. Rather, it sets a question mark against all truths. So in other words, no matter what path in the world, what religion, what philosophy, if it doesn't trigger the experience that we're talking about, it's going to leave you in the world. So what he's saying here is everything that the world offers gets classified as a question mark. It has no gift to give if you want liberation and joy. He says, it sets a question mark. It's not a door, but the hinge. The person who apprehends its meaning is removed from all strife because he is engaged in a strife with the whole, even with existence itself. Anxiety concerning the victory of the gospel is meaningless because the gospel is the victory by which the world is overcome. By the gospel, the whole concrete world is dissolved and established. That's what we're saying. So the mind goes into the void. The mind gives up all of its attraction and desire of the world, right? There's the purification. But then the mind is illuminated. And then God can bless the mind and show that blessing as the person still lives in the world. So you go into this place of total dissolution of all your illusions, and then a blessing in the world because you know you're nothing and God is everything. When you don't know that God is everything, you think the world is everything. And that's why we're lost. Is this making sense? Just a little bit more here. Okay, we can only receive the gospel, for it is the recollection of God which is created by the gospel. Okay, the world remains the world, and men remain men, even while the gospel is being received. The whole burden of sin and the whole curse of death still press heavily upon us. We must be under no illusion. The reality of our present existence continues as it is. The resurrection, which is the place of exit, well, let me skip that part. That's not what I wanted. Okay, here. Only those who believe that the gospel is the power of God can receive it. So this is, what we're talking about in terms of the narrow way. Where when you realize that the world offers you nothing, Lisa and I were just laughing about this yesterday. And don't think we have a sick or sardonic sense of humor, but it's when you realize that there's nothing to live for in the world, you get to a place like we talked about last week where you have existential angst, despair. In fact, Jesus in A Course in Miracles will say, if you don't see the world as it truly is, you can't wake up. But when you see that the world as it truly is, you want to kill yourself. And it's there, in that crisis moment, that the light can come in. That's why very few find this. Very few find it, because when we sense that overwhelming despair, we immediately run back to the familiar, to the comfortable, to the numbing, to the trivial, and we hide from the inevitable. And so what's being said here is the world must be seen as nothing, and then you can enter through faith. So in the night of despair, the birth of faith pulls you through the door. Right? That power within the mind will awaken, and you'll answer the call. Right? This is how every beautiful, spiritual, genuinely spiritual experience happens. How we wake up is, there's got to be something more. There's got to be another way. This can't be it. Like, really. That's why he'll say in one of the workbook lessons in A Course in Miracles, he says, when you put aside all of the distractions and the games that you play, everyone who is really honest with themselves cannot help but see this. Right? So there is no hope in this world. But the hope that brings you through the door right now, remember, is a faith that opens up a world of grace that you never have to move from your seat to experience it. This isn't done in time. It's done in mind and willingness. So new, so unheard of, so unexpected in this world is the power of God that it can appear among us, be received and understood by us, only as a contradiction. The gospel does not expound or recommend itself. It does not negotiate or plead or threaten or make promises. It withdraws itself always when it is not listened to for its own sake. This is precious. This is the real treasure. And if we're too petty and too distracted, we're disqualifying ourselves. So it's not that it's withheld from us, but we're just refusing it. And if we refuse it, it waits, it withdraws. And he says something beautiful in the chorus. He goes, "I wait with infinite patience." And he says, "I know you're going to make this choice because you're not at home here." So we can actually speed up the moment when we make this choice. But for many of us, that moment will only come when the pain becomes unbearable. Speaking of pain, you still have 9 more minutes with me. So I wanted to bring in a little practical approach to all of this, in keeping within the Christian teaching. There is something I want to bring out from Bart before we get into this next reading, because it's really something to take note of, as we say, when we're talking about these old-time religions, not to get hung up on the religious part of it. It says, let me see where to pick this up. Only because they have nothing better, only because they lack the courage of despair, do the generality of men on this side of resurrection avoid falling into blatant atheism. Hold on. Is that what I wanted? No, here it is. I underlined it the same, but it's on a different page. Okay. The people of Christ, right, his community, those who are waking up, getting lit up, purifying themselves, know that no sacred word or work or thing exists in its own right. They know only those words and works and things which by their negation are signposts to the Holy One. If anything Christian be unrelated to this transformative moment, it is a human byproduct, a dangerous religious survival, a regretful misunderstanding. So he's basically saying, don't make this religious. This is a transformative moment where your consciousness will shift from the world to God. And if you think that there's some kind of a hanging on to the self that's still part of the world, you'll become religious in the world. You won't be transformed out of the world. So he's saying, make sure you don't make that mistake. It's quite regrettable. He says, in this case, content would be substituted for a void, convex for concave. Okay. If this be persisted in, there emerges, instead of this living, breathing, transformative community of Christ mind, instead of that, Christendom. Christendom is that term meaning the church in the world, right? So a transformative community that's being lit up in the moment, or a bunch of people, kind of getting together for bake sales and, how you do? Oh, everything's great. I fucking want, I want to die. Right? Like that's underneath sometimes the smiles, like, everything's great, yeah. Life couldn't be better. Praise God. See, I'm a broken vessel. There's your proof. All right. You never heard that in church before. Hopefully, you'll never hear it again. That was his will. All right, so this is the cloud of unknowing. This is a 14th century Catholic mystical manual of contemplative prayer. And what's really cool about this is it's everything we've been talking about. In order to enter into that narrow gate and be lit up, you are undergoing a purification process, and this is a practical way of doing it. Underneath you, the writer, who is an anonymous writer, will say, is the cloud of forgetting. And above you is the cloud of unknowing, where the divine presence is. Your rational egoic mind can't penetrate that cloud. It's the cloud of unknowing. It's the uncreated light of God's divine presence. Well, even to say God is a concept, we want the experience. So in order to have this divine union and to feel the presence of God, he says you get to a place in your spiritual contemplative practice where you let everything go in the moments of your practice, right? It'll be back when you get in your car and you go to work, or the grandkids come over, like things will come back in and you'll be who you're being in that experience or situation. But while you're in your spiritual practice, the cloud of forgetting is there for you to utterly empty out everything. It's like you pull the drain on you. Your experiences, your beliefs, your concepts, your relationships, your hopes, your fears, your past, your future. It just drains out into the cloud of forgetting. And this is a miraculous cloud. It absorbs what you're draining out and it keeps you empty of it during the practice. A total forgetting of the self and the world. And then there's an opening to the unknowing. And that unknowing is contacted by love. So all that remains is the flame of love burning at the core of your being, and it wants its source. And it won't let anything get in the way of that. You empty of everything, even what you love, right? This is the path of negation or purgation and purification. You don't know anything, and you don't want anything. And then the path of love allows you to enter into this state of mystery and unknowing. So it says, therefore be attentive to time and the way you spend it. Nothing is more precious. This is evident when you recall that in one tiny moment, heaven may be gained or lost. God, the master of time, never gives the future. He gives only the present, moment by moment. For this is the law of the created order, and God will not contradict himself in his creation. Time is for man, not man for time. God, the Lord of nature, will never anticipate man's choices, which follow one after another in time. Man will not be able to excuse himself at the last judgment, saying to God, you overwhelm me with the future when I was only capable of living in the present. So in other words, what you're choosing now has eternal weight and consequences, right? Not that there's a punishing God, but that you're giving or withholding this love from yourself moment by moment. And then finally here. Finally here, the blue bag's going to go around. We can't get there from here. That was a fast hour. So if you're joining on YouTube or Facebook, feel free to click the link below. The church and I thank you for supporting this service, profanity and all. Again, my heartfelt apologies. Any thoughts, comments, or questions? And we bless this offering with gratitude, and we charge it with the intention that it be used in whatever form to bring all beings to true wisdom and true happiness. And so it is. Amen. All right, my friends, let's rise. And as we enter this present moment with an open and empty mind, we can come to the center of our own being and know that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Have a beautiful day, everybody. Thank you so very much.